When it comes to improving kicking, most people have got it all wrong and look to methods that only provide gains to one or two areas of kicking. Don't get me wrong, all methods are certainly valid, but it's vital to know what you should be using and at which stage of your journey. Because too many people are simply wasting their time working upon things that aren't going to provide them with that level of improvement they're looking for. But what's often not spoken about is there are some foundational or holistic methods and understandings that when properly employed will result in a hockey stick level of improvement to not just one but all areas of kicking. And in this video I'm going to be breaking down exactly what those are. So as I already mentioned in the intro section, these things I'm going to be breaking down in this video are foundational elements that you'll be able to apply to the majority of your kicking techniques, but especially kicks that strike the target laterally, like a roundhouse kick or a hook kick, and then that's going to affect the higher level versions like a spin hook kick and all that stuff. And we can view the things I'm going to be detailing in this video through the lens of the 80-20 principle, in which 80% of the consequences that you get come from 20% of the actions that you take. So rather than me suggesting a multitude of little tweaks that will give you incremental improvements here and there, aka the 20%, I'm going to be sharing just a few simple modalities that strike right at the core of kicking skill and will improve all of your techniques holistically. And only then does it become applicable to apply some more focused methods aimed at improving a singular area of the skill. And if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you don't need me to explain why that is, but for those of you that are new, it's because if you don't understand the mechanics of how to perform a good kick in the first place, then you shouldn't be trying to bolt a load of extra drills on to improve power, for instance, because they're not really even going to work if your kick is poor to begin with. There'll also be a lot of negative consequences for doing something like this as well, like you may develop muscular imbalances if you're constantly trying to force and muscle your way through techniques all the time, and that comes with hindered mobility, as well as the risk of injuries and much more. So like anything in life, you want to constantly work at making your foundation stronger and stronger and repeating the basics and refining your techniques to a higher and higher level, and the things I'm going to be sharing in this video will go a long way to helping you do that. And I know that's not very exciting to most people and it seems like a chore that's repetitive, but if you can learn to love the process of doing that, then it will pay off massively for you in the long run, and it's those who are able to do this that really excel and stand out above the masses. Now before we get into those guys, I want to let you know about something really cool, which is a free Telegram group that I've started that I'd like to invite you all to join. So I get a lot of messages and questions from people who view my content, and I've been looking for a way to interact with you guys that's better than just replying to comments and messages. And I also realise that it's kind of unfortunate that whenever someone asks me a question and I respond, then only that person really gets the benefit of what I share with them. So I'm going to be putting a lot of value in there, as well as answering your guys' questions and posting additional resources that I can't really share on YouTube. And so if you'd like to join the Telegram group, then you can find the link to do so in the description below. So the first thing that I want to talk about is learning to pivot faster. And this could be categorized as an attribute of agility, balance, and body control, and it's something that I don't see people speaking about nearly enough. And in order to explain, let me talk about my philosophy of actually all techniques, which is working at getting as much as 90% of it done as early as possible, so that all you've got left to do is that final execution, and I call this efficiency. And for the sake of this example, let's think of a kick as broken down into 3 stages. Number 1 is the starting point or the initiation, number 2 is bodily alignment, and number 3 is the final extension. Now some styles will teach you to pivot on the ball of the foot, and I do agree with that as you're becoming familiar with the technique. But as you get better, you want to become faster and more efficient at doing this, and the way I suggest that is by making less and less contact with the ground as you do it, like I'm doing in these clips. So the pivot's obviously something that happens with the feet, but you're going to need to learn to engage your whole body and swing your arms in order to get sufficient momentum to do it this way. As you can see in the way I'm doing it on this close-up, I'm actually leaving the ground completely and shifting my standing leg instantly into the final position, or at least extremely close to it in one single motion. So my foot starts here in position A, and then a split second later it's here in position B, rather than it being maneuvered continuously from A to B with the foot on the ground constantly. But just a side note to this as well, although I am leaving the ground when I do this, I'm not jumping in the air. And if you was to watch me do this without knowing exactly what I was doing, it would look like I just pivoted very quickly, so it's only a tiny distance off the ground. Now the reason this works is because pivoting correctly allows us to get our bodies into the right position to be able to kick effectively, which makes the movement seamless and also way easier to perform as well. And by executing this rapid pivot at stage 1 of the kick, it instantly puts our body into alignment for stage 2, 2. So then, as previously mentioned, all that's left to do at the end is extend the kick at stage 3, which is what makes it efficient. Now consider this approach compared to the classic pivot that most people are used to, continuously moving through the pivot while at the same time having to position their body right for the extension. It's all happening at a much slower pace and the stages become somewhat murky as opposed to the clear-cut 1, 2, 3 stages that I propose. And so an analogy is to think of our techniques like an electrical circuit in which the flow of electricity must travel through the circuit and through various transistor points before it gets to its final destination. And in our example, those transistor points represent various stages of the kick, like the pivot, etc. In order to achieve optimal electric flow, we ideally want the electrical current to travel through the circuit completely unhindered. And doing the old school pivot could be likened to the electricity becoming slowed or blocked at one of those transistor points, which diminishes its ultimate potential. And the reason it's slowed down is primarily because of that greater contact with the ground, which causes resistance against the pivot. So my suggestion is to essentially eliminate that resistance entirely by performing the pivot in one single motion, which sets the rest of the kick up more easily. So this is very easy to train, and I recommend that when you're getting used to it, just to practice reps of that initial pivot and chamber position multiple times, which will be slightly different depending on which kick you're focused on. You should aim to perform that pivot in one clean motion with your body ending in the perfectly aligned position for the kick. And you want to do this from both the lead and the rear leg. And once you're more comfortable with it, then do the same thing again, but now fully extending the kick while aiming to remain balanced and controlled throughout. Now there is one caveat to this that I want to mention that's really important, and it's an issue of timing. And that's that this is only going to work by ensuring that you've re-established contact with the ground before you extend the kick. And this happens in the most split second that you can barely notice it. So what we're not doing is kicking with our body in midair, and although I do leave the ground for that split second, I'm still landing before I actually extend the kick. If you don't do this and kick too early, then it's going to suck the power right out of that kick. It will still have some force behind it, of course, but nowhere near what it could have, because it's that contact with the ground that allows us to utilize the energy from the kinetic chain. And if you're kicking when you're in midair, then this can't happen properly. And you can notice that the majority of people who are really proficient at kicking tend to do this naturally, whether they're aware of it or not. The next thing that I want to speak about falls under technical improvement, but more specifically making the kicks narrower and more compact. Specifically what I mean by that is engineering your kicking style in a way that makes it so you only do what is absolutely essential to perform that kick and nothing more. And there are multiple places you can do this across different kicking techniques, like keeping the arms tightly wrapped and the body compact when you execute a spinning back kick, for example. But one of the most effective ways that you can begin to implement immediately is by shortening what I call the arc of attack. And the arc of attack is a term I coined, which refers to the distance a kick travels through the target from the initial chamber position through full extension and finally ending at the rechamber position. Now, I personally have a hybrid kicking style that doesn't adhere entirely to the principles of any one discipline. And I say that because if you haven't already noticed, much of what I say will clash with the very rigid mindset that many martial artists adopt. Instead, what I've done is just constantly work on my techniques with the aim of making them faster and more efficient over many years. And the result of that is what I'm sharing with you guys here, so I know it works. And this arc of attack principle is something that is not nearly discussed enough, but in my experience, it's pretty much a game-changing principle that when applied will massively improve your kicking. So to explain it simply, when it comes to executing a lateral kick, you want to think about the extension point happening around 6 to 8 inches before hitting the target and no more. Then after the kick has travelled through the target, it's then rechambered or retracted 6 to 8 inches afterwards. And this is of course something that takes work, because when you first learn a kicking technique, your body's very open and you've got a lot of inefficiency in the technique. And most people's kicks cover way too wide of an arc, which is why they commonly fall off balance and move in a laboured way throughout the kick. So this is what I mean by making the kicks more tight and compact, because we're not moving our body through a big wide plane of motion, and it will benefit the techniques in multiple ways, such as making them faster because there's less total movement happening, and it becomes way harder to read them because the kick is less telegraphed, moving closer towards the centre line rather than out wide where it can be read easily. So in order to train this, we essentially have to mindfully program our body with this new way of doing it using whatever training method you choose. And the key thing is that you have to be super aware of what you're doing, so you don't just go on autopilot and go through the motions. So you need to make sure that you're purposefully guiding your body through the kick in this exact way whenever you're training. And one of the best ways I suggest doing this is using isolated kicking drills. And we're holding on to something for balance to create a controlled method for working on this specific part of the kick. And when you're doing these, you'll want to extend your leg from the chamber, that 6 to 8 inches we spoke about previously. Then after moving it through the target, retract it once again 6 to 8 inches for the rechamber. And repeating this a number of times, both slowly and quickly, consistently, will program our body that this is how we wish that kick to be performed at full speed. And that will also be reinforced by your body becoming stronger in those specific positions, which are perfect for kicking. And this also translates to higher level variations. So for instance, working at making your standing hook kick arc nice and narrow, and that will mean the same thing happens for your spin hook kick, and it will be whippier because you're not having to deal with all that drag and resistance that comes from having an uneconomical kick with your leg coming out far too wide before reaching the target. So you still need to be quite focused when executing it fully though, especially if you've come from a certain style and way of doing something, because naturally it's going to be very easy to revert back to that if you're not being mindful. And the way I describe my own kicking style is kind of like a cross between Taekwondo and Muay Thai, and I like doing it this way because I'm able to be both fast and powerful at the same time, rather than focusing upon just power, meaning the kick would be slower, or only on speed where it wouldn't have much damage. So I hope the approaches that I broke down there were valuable, but know that this is only going to work if you've already got good command of your body and can move with control and efficiency. And if you want to know how to do that, then I suggest you watch this video next, which will feed directly into the steps that we discussed in this video and make those much easier to implement as well. Thank you very much for watching today, guys. Please join my Telegram group that I discussed about earlier, and if you'd like to book a one-on-one coaching call with me, you can find the link to both of those in the description below, and I'll see you in the next video.